inspirational and motivational content on the platform. I'm super excited to announce a new experience on CreativeLive. It's called Fast Class. You've told us that you're busy and sometimes it's hard to dive into a full class from start to finish. So essentially, we're now giving you a shortened highlight version of our top CreativeLive classes. You can always dive into the full class with 5, 10, or 15 hours of great content. But now, if you're just looking to focus on a few of the highlights or want to be able to skip quickly to something that really interests you, you can now get a shortened fast class version of that class. We're also thinking this might be able to help you explore a new craft and save time while doing it. This is a great tool to curate your learning experience to help create the life that you seek. So you're probably thinking, great, how do I access this new experience on CreativeLive? That's easy. All you have to do is be a subscriber to the Creator Pass, and then all this is yours. If you're feeling isolated and looking for creative connection, try tuning into creativelive.com/TV. That's where we've got a 24/7 live stream from the kitchen counters.
I can do that backlit shot that I really like to do.
From the studios and living rooms of many of the world's top creators, where we're doing musical performances, Q&As, cooking shows, virtual book tour events, drawing, spoken word poetry, and more.
Life passed me by waiting for an invitation when the world is greater than my nation or my occupation. Be someone you've never been. You feel all that adrenaline, it's medicine.
It actually helps me feel like my days are more purposeful.
I hope that out of this deep pain will come some collective growth.
Dive into CreativeLive TV today. Hello, everyone. Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're watching from. I'm seeing we got people from South Africa, from Dubai, from Australia, all over the world. So range of time zones. I want to say welcome. I'm Chase Jarvis, the founder of CreativeLive and your host for today's live broadcast as a part of the Chase Jarvis Live Show. My guest is very, very special. Before we get into his details and our conversation today, I want to invite you to check out creativelive.com/TV, where we've got live chat coming in from all over the world. If you'd want to leave a comment or shout out a question for our guest, I am seeing those questions and I will do what I can to forward them on. You might be watching this on Facebook or on YouTube Live. If that's the case, I can see your comments, but the best interactive opportunity is at creativelive.com/TV. Click the live chat in the upper right-hand corner, and I'll see your questions and comments. And I know you're going to want to have a question and or a comment for this gentleman because he is a New York Times bestselling author, speaker, and a freelance photographer. He's done cover stories for Nat Geo, Life Magazine, Fortune, Newsweek, and many others, and was on the Chicago Tribune staff that won the Pulitzer back in 2001. He's also the professor emeritus of visual communications at Ohio University, and most notably, the official photographer of President Reagan, and then the chief official White House photographer and director of the White House Photo Office for President Barack Obama. My guest is the one and only inimitable Mr. Pete Souza in the house. Pete, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chase. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's a treat. I know we've been working on this for some time, but you're a busy guy. Congratulations on a couple of books you've put out recently. You've been touring prior to the pandemic, obviously, but for those of the handful of people, of the thousands tuning in from all over the world who might not be familiar with your career arc, how you tackled all those accolades and were the White House photographer for both Reagan and Obama, I was wondering if you could trace a little bit of your career arc, how you got excited, interested about photography, and what twists and turns your career took on your way to the White House.
I've had a lot of twists and turns in my career. I actually went to Boston University with the hopes of becoming a sports writer, and was in their journalism school. And in my junior year, I took a photography class. This is back in the day, of course, of black and white film and making your own prints. And I think that, in all honesty, the first print I ever made where you were inside the darkroom under those red safe lights, and that image magically appeared in the tray of Dectal Developer, that I was hooked on photography, because to me it was magic. So that's sort of like how it started for me, fairly late in life, because I know a lot of people make pictures in high school and things like that. I didn't, it was my junior year of college. And it took me probably to the point of maybe, I guess, like, I want to say 5 years before I got any good at it. I think I was a slow learner in a lot of ways. And then I started out working for small newspapers in Kansas. And really, for me, it's been a matter of, I think, a good work ethic and a lot of luck along the way, in all honesty, that sort of propelled me to where I ended up. It's just hard work and luck. I mean, just decisions that you make. You get to this point of your life, and you start thinking back on decisions that you made back in the day, and it just, one thing led to another, and I ended up becoming, a presidential photographer twice. Never, was something I ever aspired to. It just kind of, that's the direction I ended up in, basically.
Well, was it your photojournalism background that you feel like prepared you best for that? Was it, is it some sort of a tenacity to chase the story? Is it your ability to see? I mean, there's, millions of photographers around the world and tens of thousands in DC, and probably thousands that would be in contention for some of the jobs that you've received. What do you feel like is the difference maker? You mentioned luck and a little bit of skill. I think you probably need to flip the order there, but is there Is there any one decision that you feel like really changed the trajectory of your career, or was it tenacity? What put you in the hunt at all?
I mean, I think it was being at a journalism school when I um, discovered photography. You know, because maybe had I been in an art school or um, uh, places I could have been, I happened to be in the journalism school, and thus became a photojournalist as a result. And I think for me, the initial attraction was photography, not necessarily photojournalism. Um, I think I have this. I always tell people that I don't think I'm the greatest photographer in the world, but I really believe I was the right photographer to be the chief official White House photographer for President Obama. I just think everything in my career came together in that job. Um, the ability and I think I had developed an eye for framing and the moment, the anticipation, um, but also the ability to really hang out and not be a nuisance and not interfere with what was taking place. You know, essentially be a fly on the wall. Um, and do that in a professional way, and have as my main subject someone who understood the role of having somebody like me visually record a presidency. Just like everything came together in that job, in the 8 years of that job, which to me is sort of like the capstone of my career.
Yeah, clearly penultimate.
But I mean, also, like, I mean, just having had the experience at National Geographic for a few years where I learned more about light and color than I probably did when I was working for a newspaper. And so, I mean, all these factors came into play.
Well, one of the things that I loved that you said, which I think is often really wildly overlooked, coming from a photographic background myself, is the ability, the technical skills. I think that is just one small piece of an otherwise complex puzzle. And what I loved, you said it very clearly, your ability to hang out, to be in a position to get the shot, not, I think you said nuisance, not be a nuisance. And I just think that that is the most sort of underappreciated, or misunderstood part about any photographic job. And so what people are thinking right now, the photographers in the audience, again, we've just had some more folks join from Indonesia, from Hungary, from Mexico. What I think they want to hear is, well, great, how do you get good at hanging out? If the technical skills you can master, what does it mean? How do you practice that? And is it a social skill? Are you extroverted, introverted? Build a little story for us around, why you think you might be great at that.
I wish I could give you a bullet point list of, here's how it's done. I just had a long conversation on the phone the other day with somebody who was applying to be an official photographer for one of our governors. And, and he was asking the same question. And I was like, every case is different. And it's something that I think you develop as a human being, more so than as a photographer, is sort of how to relate to people, and every person is different. And this is why I say I think I was the right person to be Barack Obama's photographer. I mean, we're sort of from the same, more or less, generation. I'm actually a few years older than him, and I think that actually helped. But also knowing, just like understanding when to say something to him and when not to say something to him. And it's not something that you can teach. It's just it's something that you sort of learn over time, I think. And that's about the best answer that I can give. I think it's really hard to articulate, other than it's different for every situation. I mean, I think Bill Clinton would have been, a completely different character in terms of how you would relate to him, because he's such, much more gregarious personality than President Obama. And I don't mean that in a negative or positive way. I'm just saying they're two different people, and so it's just hard to give an answer to that.
No, I think embedded in that answer that it's hard to put a finger on, is that's part of the je ne sais quoi that I think those who are trying to emulate your career, any career, I think ought to know. And it's something that not a lot of creators talk about or can define. You mentioned President Clinton, President Obama, but so far we haven't talked much about your experience photographing Reagan. Do you feel like was that like a prep lap? Was that like your warm up presentation for what was ultimately the penultimate with Obama? Talk to us a little bit about the differences between not just the characters, but your role in those two different presidencies.
I think looking back on it now, it was a prep for Obama. I didn't think that at the time, because at the time I was thinking, this is the one and only time I'm ever going to be inside the White House as an official photographer, so I'm going to try to make the most of it. I was not the chief photographer. I was hired by his chief photographer, Michael Evans, in the middle of his first term. So I came in, I was like the new guy. And, it took a little sort of getting used to. I was in my late 20s, and I was overwhelmed with suddenly being able to just walk into the Oval Office. And so I think the access situation was a little different in that I didn't have, total access. But I still feel that I was able to make some really good moments during the Reagan administration. It's just they weren't as many because of the particular situation with Reagan. I tell people this. I didn't necessarily agree with his politics, but I did think he was a decent human being, and that he respected the office of the presidency. And I think that it would be difficult to do that job for me if I did not have both of those. In other words, that I didn't think the president was a decent human being and that they were respecting the office. I think it would be difficult for me to work under any other circumstance. I liked President Reagan. He was difficult to get to know. Even his family says that. But I mean, he was a genial, old-fashioned, conservative. I don't mean in his politics. I mean in his manners, his mannerism. He didn't take his suit coat off in the Oval Office unless it was the weekend. So it's like, and it was the 80s. So it was a different era.
Well, if that was the preparation workout, if you will, for what would ultimately be your 8-year tour duty with Obama, is there anything that you learned? Is there any like burning memory that you have that said, if given another opportunity, what I would do differently? Or there's some key mistakes, key learning moments that came out of that first tour duty with Reagan that you applied to your second with Obama?
One of the things that happened was that this was back in the 80s when there wasn't social media, where you were shooting film and it would take, a day before you would see what you had shot, that kind of thing. And most of the pictures that the White House then released were there were very few, and it wasn't the behind the scenes moments necessarily. I say that because I went into the Obama administration with, I guess, a few thoughts. One was that I needed to have total access, and that I was going to starting on day one. That was all that was my focus. And President Obama understood that, but imagine he's a human being like you and I, and to all of a sudden have this guy taking pictures of you every day, all day long, it takes a little getting used to. So it was sort of like trying to, navigate that in a way that I wasn't going to relinquish my access. So, and that was something that I didn't have during the Reagan administration, which was total access. I was determined that I was going to have that in the Obama administration. So that's one. Two was going back to those behind the scenes moments. That was my focus too, is capturing these spontaneous moments as they happen. And whether they're seen right away or like with Reagan, they're not seen till 10 years later, 20 years later, it didn't matter. What mattered is making sure that I was going to make those pictures in the first place. And I guess lastly, it was to make authentic pictures of what was taking place in his presidency.
Well, part of I'm getting questions in from all over the world, and one of them is from Anders. Obviously, reveres your work. Is thankful for our conversation today, but wants me to ask, and it's along the same lines as what you were just speaking of, which is why I'm bringing it up, about the juxtaposition between prepared images and reportage or candid moments. Is that something you negotiate? How do you balance those two? What was the approach?
The approach was everything was spontaneous. And again, it was the, my pushing to always be there. We did photo lines per se, where, that person comes in, they want to get a picture standing in front of the desk with the president, you make that picture. And that's obviously, a posed picture, but everything else is as it happens. And it was, that was something that President Obama inherently, is that the right word? Understood. And it didn't need to be negotiated. And this, imagine if he's not objecting to me being in the room, how could anybody else? And so it was just expected that I would always be there. And I sort of talked about this in terms of how I made this work. I made sure that I knew my role was as an observer. My role was not as a participant. So I'm in these meetings or I'm in these situations, and I don't interrupt. I don't say what I think. I keep my mouth shut. Now, that doesn't mean that if I'm alone with him, that I might, converse with him. But I always made it a point that when he was in the middle of a conversation with somebody, I was not part of that conversation. I was the observer, unless, somebody would say something to me.
Well, I think this is a key area, just seeing, again, more questions come in, a key area of curiosity. Does that mean you never coached? Like, hey, Barack, turn your head a little more sideways, or, step forward into the light. Is there any coaching that happens in those worlds, even when you're just, it's just you and he?
No, no coaching at all.
Interesting. Really, really fascinating. Well, let's depart for a second on the psychology of what it was like and your philosophy on photographing, and touch just briefly on something that I'm not that enamored with, but I know from the comments people are interested in the technology. Obviously, you mentioned huge arc in technology change from your first assignment as a photojournalist back at the papers, then obviously probably a different world where you had a lot of film being pushed through the system. But as you mentioned, it was film and a lot of these images were delayed. And then the instantaneous, you're looking at the back of a camera and you probably are Wi-Fiing it to someone else. Can you talk about maybe those three different buckets and what it was like to be both, I guess, anchored by in some ways and empowered by the different modes of operating, between your early career and later on with Obama and the instant nature of digital photography?
I switched to digital in 2000 when I was with the Chicago Tribune. And I remember it was then because it was on the way to the New Hampshire primary on the plane with my new digital cameras that I was sort of reading the manual, trying to figure out how to use this camera.
Was that a D1, a Nikon D1 by chance?
D1, yeah.
Yeah, I remember that camera.
And, up until then, I had still been shooting film for the Tribune, color negative film at the time. And so that began the transition for me. And one of the great regrets is that those early digital cameras were not that good. Yeah. And subsequently, the following year, I after 9/11, I went to Afghanistan for the beginning of the war, and risked my life and. I made images that I'm as proud of as any I've ever made in my career, and those are on like the old digital camera, and that really hurts me to this day.
A 2 megabyte file, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was like whatever megabyte file, and because of hard drive space when you're in Afghanistan, I had to shoot JPEG and not RAW, so that really pains me looking back on it. Subsequently over the years, the digital cameras got better and better and better and better. And my predecessor, Eric Draper, who was George W. Bush's chief White House photographer, made the switch to digital at the start of Bush's second term. And that he transitioned the White House photo office to an all digital office. And so when I started, Eric was really great about transitioning with me, and I'm so glad that he was the one that did that, and that didn't fall on my shoulders, because that made it easier to hit the ground running with the just digital workflow with the White House. And matter of fact, I was talking to somebody about this the other day. I realized that I started photographing Barack Obama after he had been elected to the U.S. Senate in 2004, and I've come to the realization that I have never ever made a single image of Barack Obama with film. Every picture I've ever made of him, starting in 2004, has been on a digital camera, which is kind of crazy to me. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that I try to still, even though given the immediacy of digital during the Obama administration, I still made it clear to everyone that my main job was to document the presidency for history. That's the main part of the job, is that so I did not want to be carrying a laptop with me or worrying about sending pictures wirelessly in the moment because, the White House website wanted something right away. So I set the marker down right away that I would not operate like that, that I did not want to be in the middle of some big speech sending a photo back, so the White House would have it right away to post on Twitter or whatever. That was not, the main function of my job. So, that rubbed people a little bit the wrong way. And I would try to accommodate, them as much as I could, but I wasn't going to be carrying a laptop, and I wasn't going to not be documenting what he was doing just so somebody could have a picture right away. That was a big distinction that I made, and I held firm on that.
Is that a negotiation? I mean, what?
No, it wasn't a negotiation. It was like, this is the way I'm doing it, because to me, posting stuff on social media is not number one on the job description. Number one is documenting the presidency for history. All my pictures, every single one of them, ends up at the National Archives. I didn't want to miss something because I was sending something back.
Yeah, so doing something that was number 4, 5, or 10 on the list, right?
Yeah. So,
well, if it's not a negotiation, is this then something you have worked out in the job interview, so to speak? I think people are wondering how you actually get this job. You mentioned, working for the senator after his election to the Senate for Illinois. So is this a part of the relationship building over time, where you establish your boundaries? And I'm thinking, if this is your client, for example, that this is broadly applicable for anyone who's listening. I'm just curious what your methodology was for sort of stamping. I think you said you put your marker down. How does one do that and not make enemies, or did you have to make some enemies and stand tall with something you believe deeply in?
Oh, I'm sure some people were pissed off at me, but it's
part of the job, right? Part of the job.
Yeah, I mean, I said to them, I will help you out if it doesn't interfere with documenting for history, and interrupting, a big event, documenting a big event, so that I could get you your pictures so you could tweet it out while it was happening, is not a good argument to make. So, I mean, I did have a staff. So if said event was at the White House, it would be real easy after the event to hand a photo editor my cards, and they could start the process. So it wasn't like it was going to be the next day, but it wasn't going to be, in the moment. And, and there were instances where, State of the Union, for example, I would have one of the photographers that worked for me set up like where the press is, and he may live transmit something from his camera. So we would try to make accommodations, but I did not want to sort of go overboard about, social media being the number one thing on my, list of things to do.
I think it's just ruthless prioritization, and that's part of what a lot of people need to hear. I think that the modern creator is a person who wears lots of hats, and I think it's really curious and interesting as someone who is, the chief photographer of the White House, who has a staff, still has to wear many hats, and still has to make hard decisions of what to do and what not to do. I think that's
Well, I mean, I
telling.
think that it's an unusual job in that the it's the only staff photography job where you're also the boss. In other words, the photo editors work for you. They don't. It's not like most newspapers and magazines. The photo editor is the boss, right? And so um, that easier to sort of say, okay, this is the way it's going to be. And but again, it wasn't. As I said, the number one thing in the back of my mind was documenting for history, and every argument to me was based on that.
Hmm. You mentioned the photo editor, and that brings to mind, conjures up sort of workflow and questions about editing. And if you had an editor, those editors work for you. What was the relationship with that with them? And we got Kristen Schmidt asking, how do you catalog these photos? What kind of you've remarked several times about you're in this for history. That's a very profound burden to bear. And, obviously every day when you're posting pictures of shade, you're able to clearly able to keyword search for a moment that's happened in the previous day. And so I think, as you have done such a nice job of pulling back the curtain for us, maybe you could share a little bit about the editing process and, what goes into creating a catalog like you have that's at your fingertips, but also infinitely complex and sliceable and diceable, an infinity number of ways.
Yeah, so we had a filing system. Like we established the file name for each photograph, which was based on the date and then the file number chronologically throughout the day. So you'd have this file number, a dash starting 0001, and then chronological throughout the day. Every single photograph had a caption attached. We had a photo archivist that had been there since the Reagan administration. I had actually known her back in the Reagan days, and so she would then go in and try to add everybody's name that was pictured, keywords. So I mean, I'm as proud of the images as I am of the information that's attached to each image. For historians, it's just like so important to have that information. So, for instance, you could, if you wanted to, search at the National Archives, Obama alone with Dennis McDonough, all the pictures from the 8 years would come up. That's the kind of system we built. And we wanted to make sure that all that information, I mean, one of the things that Eric Draper had said to me, this is Bush's photographer, was that a lot of the information was lost during the transfer from the White House to the National Archives. Mm. And so we made the one upgrade we did is we worked with the National Archives, and they built a database that included all the ability to transfer all the information that was attached with each image. In terms of editing, it would be something like on a daily basis, the White House website would come to us and say, hey, we would like to use we're doing a post of the president's meeting with Angela Merkel, and we need a picture to go with that post. So one of the photo editors would go through my take and select 2 or 3 images and usually email them to me. I actually ran my office basically on my BlackBerry. So they would email me the images and I would say, yeah, send all 3, or I don't, I only like the second one, or I might say, I thought I shot this particular image. Can you see if you can find that? And that's how the editing process worked. In terms of, we started doing this monthly upload on Flickr at the end of the month, we would do a series of behind the scenes pictures. And that's something that would involve more editing, more my involvement, more where I would show the pictures to somebody in the White House press office to make sure that, they're okay with them. So that's sort of how it worked.
Yeah, brilliant. And just to as someone who has cataloged millions and millions of my own images and knows just enough to be dangerous about the amount of work that goes in, it's not a surprise that you say you're as proud as the cataloging and the image or the information as you are the image. But I think that's just phenomenal as a contribution to history, because the image without as much of that information is less of a historical record. What about the technology? You mentioned databases, and what kind of platform were you using? Are you using the same ones today? Is the National Archive built on something that is consumer grade? Is it enterprise grade? Talk to us a little bit about some of the technology used in your workflow, and then we'll move on to less tactical and more strategic and contemplative things.
Yeah, so we ingested our cards using Photo Mechanic, which is sort of something that photojournalists tend to use. Easy to add captions and keywords and things like that. And then the database was something that Eric Draper had purchased a license to Merlin 1. And so all the images would go into Merlin 1, and we'd have a server and a backup server that the White House maintained. And then when it came time to transfer to the National Archives, they were not allowed to use Merlin 1, and for reasons that I'm not quite clear about, one of which was that once you send a record to the National Archives, you cannot change the record. And so Merlin 1, you could go in and we would update captions all the time as we added names and things like that. But once it was sent to the National Archives, it becomes a locked file from the White House to the National Archives. And Merlin, you can go in and change things. So they couldn't use Merlin. So I worked really diligently with them and an IT guy at the White House to build a similar system as Merlin, and and so they hired a contractor to build this database that is as good, if not better, than Merlin.
Wow.
And, yeah.
Well, Julie's asking, do all of your photos end up in the National Archives then?
Yeah, every single one. So I shot about 1.9 million photos. I didn't quite make it to 2 million. So they're all now at the National Archives.
Amazing. What a contribution to history. Speaking of history, I want to shift gears to talk about some of the key moments that you photographed that are, indelibly embedded in culture forever. One that comes to mind is the image in the moment where the raid on Osama bin Laden's compound is going down. Can you talk to us about your experience there, what you can share, and just being in so many of those moments? Do you have some favorite photographs besides that one that is just so iconic?
Yeah. So that was a long day. That was a really long day. But the raid itself, when they were monitoring the raid as it happened, that was around about 40 minutes, and it's as tense and anxious a time as I can probably remember in my career, and it was tense, more so for the people in the room than it was for me, although I was pretty tense too. I mean, I think part of the to me the interesting aspect of the photograph is that you've got all the most powerful people in the executive branch of our government all jammed into this tiny room. And yet in that moment, they are powerless because, their decision had already been made, and now it was up to those guys on the ground, and they're watching this unfold, and there's nothing they can do about it. And I think that the tension that you see in that photograph, that was a situation where, I wish mirrorless cameras had been had advanced to the point where they are now. Back then, this is 2011, they didn't. So I was using a Canon 5D Mark II, I guess, which was, fairly quiet, but it did make noise. And so I did not, in those 40 minutes, I did not shoot a lot of frames. I think I shot a little over 100, as I recall, or maybe just under 100, which is not really a lot. And in terms of like choosing that particular image, I don't know. I think that when people are able to see all the images that I shot in that room, which they will eventually, I think I chose the right one. I feel confident that it's the best picture. Were there others where you could see the same tension? Yeah, but oftentimes with that many people in a picture, somebody's looking the other way, or somebody's caught in the mid blank, or somebody's looking down, or whatever. And for whatever reason, I mean, that one just sort of gravitated right away. And I think hopefully people will agree with me when I look at all my images that I chose the right one.
Oh, yeah, clearly stunning image. And that's part of why you shoot 100, right? Because of the blinking and the nose picking and the scratching and the off moments. You got to shoot 100 to get a handful of the ones that you love. Did that become a tool for those moments? I think we're trying to speak specifically of some of these just hyper historic, like just amazing captures. Was the mirrorless, did that become a key piece of machinery for that purpose of the silent or almost silent shutter?
We never used mirrorless cameras. To me, they hadn't yet gotten to the point where they could match the quality of the DSLR. I mean, I thought the Canon DSLR was fairly quiet. There was a silent mode. It wasn't totally silent, but it was pretty quiet. And I wasn't like a guy, I didn't use like a motor drive or rapid fire, or I didn't use a flash for, the candid pictures. And so I think, I think people, it wasn't that disruptive, if at all.
Yeah.
Obviously today it'd be much easier with a mirrorless to be the fly on the wall, because there's, no noise if you so choose. But the mirrorless didn't really come into play during the Obama administration.
I don't know about you. I still can't get over the digital viewfinder concept. The focuses always seems imprecise versus what I can see with my eye through an actual, SLR mirror. I suppose that technology's improved, but like I like you didn't really see it suitable for the pro jobs. Do you feel like in these moments, having the tool be just an extension of your body and you're focused on these moments, did you trained for these moments in advance? Are you visualizing anything when you walk into this room, or you walk into the situation room, or any of these other really high pressure, high profile moments that you've been so lucky to capture? Are you thinking about it, making a picture, or is it always reacting in the moment?
I'd say 90% of the time just reacting in the moment. I think my framing and my use of light in certain instances have developed over time, and it's a product of everything I've experienced in my career. There's a handful of times when one that comes to mind in particular is on the last day, leaving the Oval Office for the last time, where I actually I was thinking about how can I know what door he's walking out. I know about what time he's going to walk out, and capture this in such a way that sort of embodies the moment. And so in a case like that, I might think about it ahead of time and plan accordingly. In that particular case, it involved borrowing a ladder, to sort of get up high to show the sort of the as much of the Oval Office as I could. So, but those instances were pretty rare.
Mm. You mentioned early in your career, early in a conversation about being in Afghanistan and actually being in war. Can you juxtapose the moment of sitting in, say, the Situation Room when you were photographing the raid versus actually not at that moment, but being boots on the ground in a place like Afghanistan? Which a lot of people in the who are listening right now or watching have questions about the juxtaposition of the pressure of your job versus the life and death aspects of being a war photographer.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a couple friends that have been killed in war, and there's no comparison. Yeah, my job at the White House had a lot of pressure, but there were no bullets flying over my head. There was no rocket-propelled grenades heading my way, whistling through the air. My life wasn't in danger. And so it's a different kind of pressure, but it doesn't compare to what it's like for, a war photographer, and which I will say I was not good at. I did not function well when I heard, sniper bullets whistling over my head. I did not function well, and I was not made out to um, to to do that for a career. I mean, I'm glad that I went to Afghanistan. There's pictures there I'm really proud of, but it's not something that I would ever do again.
Yeah, it just seems so hardcore. And obviously several in our community have passed over the course of the last 2 decades of conflict. I want to shift gears and juxtapose all of this work that you've done in photojournalism for a couple of different administrations and the reportage with some work that I gather you do for fun. And I'm going to harken a moment. We've met before. I don't know if you remember this. I'm guessing you probably don't. I was at the White House hanging with the Lumineers at South by Southwest. I was a guest of, the administration, and had known the Lumineers, helped them start telling some stories early on in their career with Jeremiah and Wes. Those guys are amazing. We were standing in the Rose Garden talking about taking pictures of music and whatnot. So you take pictures of music.
I knew you look familiar. Now it's coming back to me. By the way, I have to say that the last public thing I've ever done, like meaning go out in public, is I saw those guys in Milwaukee on March 11th. It was their last concert, basically, probably for the year. They didn't know it at the time, but that was like the last time I've ever been out in public and with other people.
Oh, those guys are amazing. We did a live broadcast of a whole set of music from our CreativeLive studios in Seattle on the day that their big album dropped, whatever. I think that was 2011 or 12. So I've known those guys for a long time, and
Yeah.
I know you think highly of them. And I want to explore a little bit of the stuff that it seems like you do for. I don't know if it's for fun. Maybe you can tell us why you do it. You photographed the Lumineers a lot. Brandy Carlisle is obviously a subject of yours. Your turtle Charlotte is a subject, and
Yeah, she's walking around.
someone in the broadcast or someone in the comments said, "I think I see a turtle head over there somewhere in the behind your shoulder."
She was walking around. I don't know where she is right now, but she was walking around.
Well, as those subjects are very different than what you're known for photographing. I'm just wondering if you can talk about, is that an area of passion? Are these just friends of yours you're casually photographing? And since we share that in common, I was just a little bit curious how you go back with Jeremiah and Wesley and those guys.
Yeah, no, I met them for the first time at South by Southlawn when you were there, and kept in touch with them. And then my book, Obama: An Intimate Portrait, was printed in Verona, Italy, and I was there for 3 weeks as they were printing the book. And it just so happened that the Lumineers had a concert in Verona, and so I hooked up with them there, and then I sort of kept in touch, and they invited me to photograph in the studio when before their third album came out, and yeah, so I've become friends with them, and I like music. I've been a huge music fan my whole life. I've played guitar my whole life. I'm really bad at it, but I play chords and stuff like that. And I met Brandy, I don't know, 10 or so years ago. She became a really good friend of mine, and so I photographed her a lot. And I think it's funny. Like I was mentioning earlier, that I just happened to be in journalism school when I developed a passion for photography, and I think if I had thought about it back then and known that you could become a music photographer, that I'd sort of like to go back to 1976 and switch and start to make my mark as a music photographer back then. So now I kind of just do it for fun. Is probably more than anything.
It's really seeing your pictures. You can tell the connection that you have with the artists is key to it. I'm sort of hearkening the commentary that you had earlier around just being able to be present with an Obama or a Reagan, or just be the fly on the wall, be comfortable to be around. And I think that's probably has a little bit to do with the photographs that you're able to get of some of these musicians. It's fun to see you outside of what you're well known for, and obviously still making incredible pictures. What about Charlotte? Like you've taken documenting her. I've seen a lot of Charlotte videos on your IG feed. Always been a turtle guy?
Yeah, I mean she has her own Instagram feed now.
Yes.
Charlotte the Tortoise. I think she has like 25,000 followers or something like that.
Charlotte the Tortoise.
Charlotte the Tortoise. So she, my wife's kids got Charlotte when they were little kids, and kids grow up, they leave the house, and they don't take their pets with them. So now I sort of like am, I guess, the father to Charlotte, and her caretaker, and she's just like, it's just an unusual pet, and I started, doing videos of her and still photos, and people were just fascinated. So she started her own account, and there's actually, Charlotte posted today a selfie with me and Charlotte. And that's all I'll say, so people can go check it out. It's not on my Instagram account, it's on her Instagram account.
Charlotte the Tortoise, for those who are curious and tuning in late. And if you are tuning late, I'm Chase Jarvis. I'm here with Pete Souza, legendary photographer of many things, and not the least of the chief photographer for Barack Obama at the White House. Let's see here. So we've covered a lot of ground. I think it's really important to cover a piece of making choices with your art and locking these. You've got 1.9 million moments that you've captured in film, but only a couple hundred get to make your books. And a couple of books, one most recently, Shade, Tale of Two Presidents, before that, Obama, An Intimate Portrait, both #1 New York Times bestsellers. When we think about creating and putting as much stuff out as we can and capturing the moments and getting them cataloged, at some point we have to make a choice of what art to put out there and what to hold on to. Talk to us about editing those books. And when you have 1.9 million images and you have some of the most iconic photographs of an iconic time and iconic, I guess, subjects like Reagan, like Obama, and all of the world's top dignitaries and whatnot, how in the world do you make choices?
That was tough. I mean, the Obama An Intimate Portrait, which is the book that I'll forever be the proudest of that I've ever done. There's probably a little over 300 pictures in the book, and it was agonizing. I don't know how else to say it, but I had a few things in the back of my mind. One was, what was it like during the Obama presidency? And so that was a thought in the back of my mind. Two, what are some of the most important things that happen, big events? And three, what's Barack Obama like as a human being? And that probably overrode everything. Is I really wanted to show images that showed what he was like as a person. And there's some big events that just didn't make the book, because I was more looking for these human moments, these human interactions that I thought really showed what he was like. And there's some cool pictures in there too, like of Air Force One and Marine One, and just like cool visual images that maybe don't tell you anything about him, and trying to mix some of those in too. But for the most part, the ones that I was really trying to get in the most were just those moments that tell you what he's like.
Moments with others, moments alone.
Yeah, all of that.
All of it. Of course, lots of folks want to know about your favorite capture, and I personally hate being asked about my favorites, but I'm projecting now, and that's a bad role as an interviewer. So, do you have some favorites, or is the one?
I mean, for me, it was the and I don't think I really mentioned this before, but I was intent on trying to create the best body of work that had ever been done on a president. That was sort of like, that was my overarching goal. And so I'll let, others sort of weigh in on, well, this is your best picture, this is your most I mean, a lot of people say, oh, the Situation Room is your most famous picture. Well, yeah, I mean, it's a historic image, but at the same time, I wouldn't say that's like, it's not hanging on my wall anywhere. It's not one of those. So, and I think over time it changes. What are your favorite images? It changes over time, and so I sort of like always punt in answering that.
Me too. Anything that's a superlative, like what's the best, the most, the coolest, it's always so hard. You're picking from a lifetime of things. And I can only imagine that's probably exponentially harder for someone who's lived a life and seen the things that you've seen. Speaking of your hanging on your wall back there, I do see the famous Snake River Grand Teton image by Ansel Adams in the background there.
Well, I'll tell you a funny story about that.
Please do.
When my book Shade came out, it was being printed at Meridian Printing in Rhode Island. They do great photography books. And while my book was printing on one press, this poster was being printed on the other press. And I saw it coming off the press, and I was like, can I have one of those? And they're like, yeah, we'll trim off, all the color codes. And I said, no. Keep all that stuff on there. I want everything. I want the whole sheet. And so that's what that is. I don't know if you can see at the top is the
the color bars.
To me, that was the coolest part of it. So
in parallel with that, are there other photographers whose work that you respect and admire, or that have maybe played a key role in developing you as an artist? It's a little bit of a typical question, but I'm wondering if you have, if you have some folks that you looked up to that have paved the way, or maybe even outside of photography that have been really influential in your development as a creator.
I mean, there's so many. I think for me, three people that I never met that have influenced my career. Cartier-Bresson, of course, the great French photographer who was so good at composition, framing, and moments.
The decisive moment.
Slice of life. W. Eugene Smith, the old Life magazine photographer, photojournalist, developer of the picture story, the photo essay, in many ways, and looking through his famous essays, The Country Doctor, and things like that, certainly had influenced me. And then I think in terms of at the White House, Yoshi Okamoto, who was LBJ's photographer and really was the first official White House photographer to truly document a presidency for history, meaning he just had total access and just raised the bar on what it meant to be a White House photographer. And in terms of White House photography, I think that he definitely influenced me more than anyone. And I'm sorry that I never got to meet him. He tragically died from suicide, I think, in 1984. And matter of fact, that last fall, I got this call sort of out of the blue from his son. And it was such a fascinating conversation to talk to his son about his dad. So I think, Okamoto has had a huge influence on my White House career.
Well, you are insanely talented at your job. You've got a clear place in history locked in for yourself, and the images that you have created locked in the legacy of a couple men in particular, of Barack Obama, of course. But with respect to your own, I'm curious if you have advice, and advice for people who, it's not just about wanting to become the next presidential photographer, but for people who have big dreams. And I don't know when you came into have the dream of being, a White House photographer, or one for particular for Obama, but clearly you've had dreams in your career. And I'm wondering if you could give some advice, not just for photographers, but for all creators out there, about what it took to pursue your dreams, and if there's something that's missing from the dialogue in pop culture at large.
Well, that's a big question. And I will simplify it because I can only say what's worked for me, which is work hard. Every assignment, every time you're asked to make a picture, no matter who the client is, do the best job you can. you're gonna get lucky in your career if people see that you do work hard. For photographers, then specifically, I mean, I don't think there's any, like, you can't get on an elevator and hit 20 and get the job that you want. You just have to work hard. And I would not necessarily aspire to become a White House photographer. And I say that because the odds are against you. And I mean, I got lucky. That's how it happened to me. And you could do all the right things and still not get that job. So instead, I would say just, do the best you can at what you're doing. People will recognize it. For a photographer, I think it's so important to get out there every single day to make pictures. I think you learn by your failures. And the only way that you can fail is to try. And, even today, I mean, I'm limited in because of I have asthma, I'm at that age group where I do not want to get coronavirus. So I'm limited in what I can do. But I'm still, I mean, I was out this morning doing macro shots of my peonies out front, just try to engage every day in photography. I mean, you look at somebody like John Stanmeyer, who is, I think, on day, I don't know, 40 something. He's a National Geographic photographer stuck at home in Massachusetts. And every day he's photographing in his house. And it's fascinating. I mean, it's genius to show the creativity that exists in the world. And if you're not, these are different times, and some people are willing to take more risks than me, and that's all fine and everything. But I think it's so important to be photographing every day and learn from your mistakes.
You said it's a one-liner. It was a quick one-liner earlier in our conversation that I want to come back to here at the end. And the quick one-liner was, I just tried to make the most authentic images that I could. And you were referring to the Obama presidency. Clearly, you're a super authentic person. This conversation just oozes it. And I'm wondering, when you said make an authentic portrait, and when you carry yourself as you do, like, what is authenticity for you? It's a word that gets thrown around quite a bit, but what was, how do you think of that word, and what role has it played in your career?
I mean, I think it's to me, authenticity is being truthful, and truth is open to interpretation, because we all bring our own background and thinking into every situation we're in. But authenticity to me means that you're representing what is taking place in a objective and truthful way. And to me, it's the mood and the emotion, right? That you're, like, the picture in the Situation Room, to me, that represents the true mood and emotion of what was taking place, that I witnessed, the way I saw it. And so I think that's what I mean by authenticity. And I think it's actually even more important today than ever that photojournalists especially are doing that. Because, I mean, I don't want to get into politics, but that we have one of our highest national leaders questioning the whether something is fake news or not. It is so important for photojournalists, especially, to be authentic in the images that they're posting or publishing, and um, not to misrepresent any situation. It is so vitally important.
On the topic of importance, Shade, A Tale of Two Presidents, incredible, not just result in having, so many copies be sold and hit the New York Times list, but just incredibly timely. Obama, An Intimate Portrait, such a capsule of legendary work. Those two books, if you haven't, if you're listening right now and you haven't looked at either or both, now is a great time to go pick up a copy. And I'm curious, Pete, what, after two just incredible books, what is next? Do you have another book in the works? Are you working on something that you can share with us right now, or is it all hush hush? What are you working on?
I've got I'm still actually trying to figure out my next big project. Will I do another book someday? Yes. What will that book be? Not sure yet. I will tell your listeners that there is a documentary film in the works coming out about me and my career, mostly centered on President Obama, that will be out this fall. It's being produced and by Laura Dern, the actress, and Evan Hayes, who produced Free Solo. And so that's coming out this fall, and I have a lot of involvement in that film. I'm also helping President Obama with the photographs for his forthcoming book, and so hopefully some of the pictures that didn't make my book will appear in his book. So I'm sort of helping him curate those images.
Nice, just kicking it with a casual shared Lightroom library, or walk down the street and lay out some tear sheets and help the former president pick out some good pictures. I'm sure it's more advanced than that, but I would love to see some more of those images come to light, as I'm sure so many. And congratulations on the documentary. Wow, that is.
Yeah, it's a little unnerving because I'll lose a little bit more of my anonymity, which is a little uncomfortable, but I think the documentary will be for the greater good. So
what a crew you've got working on it. I've been a long time friends with Jimmy Chin, the director for Free Soul, who was actually the most recent guest last week on the show, right? Preceded you.
I've never met Jimmy, and obviously he's good friends with Evan Hayes, who is one of the producers, and now I'm good friends with Evan. So
small world.
Someday we'll meet.
I think so. We'll all come together. And just I can't thank you enough for not just this conversation, but your role in history, for being such an iconic, humble, hardworking, badass photographer. Clearly one of the best in the business, best to ever hold a camera in the photojournalism world. You've taken, some of the most iconic photographs of the last 20 years. And it's really important that I give you a shout out from Michael and Chris and Ali Rice and Robert and Han and Ryan and Jennifer Lee. People from all over the world want to say thank you so much for inspiring them. There's a lot of congratulations about your book, a lot of just kind notes about your role in telling amazing stories of the past 2 decades. And just for me personally, thanks so much for being on the show, Pete. What's the best place if people want to learn more? Where would you steer them? And how can this community come together to help support you as the artist you are?
So my website's petesouza.com, pretty simple. And at Instagram, I'm at Pete Souza. So it's those are I actually haven't updated my website in probably, I don't know, 5 years or something like that. But you could see more of my work there. And I regularly post to Instagram if you're not following me on Instagram. And sometimes I post old pictures of President Obama or new pictures of Charlotte or pictures of my flowers.
Well, it's all fascinating. And while Charlotte might be a great subject, she's not the fastest typer, so she does not post as often as
No,
Pete.
she doesn't post as often, but yeah, she posts a lot of videos.
And that's Charlotte the tortoise for anyone who's curious on Instagram. Pete, again, thanks so much for being on the show. You're a legend and an inspiration to so many, including myself. I appreciate you taking the time out, and I just want to wish you the very best.
Thanks for having me on, Chase. I appreciate it.
All right, everybody, signing off. Make sure to go follow Pete if you're not already. I know most of you probably are, as he's a legend in our midst. And remember, if you were watching this at Facebook Live or YouTube Live, come check us out at creativelive.com/TV, where we have conversations like this every day and more than 2,000 classes from the world's top creators and entrepreneurs. I'm Chase Jarvis signing off. Pete, thanks again for being on the show. We'll see everybody again, hopefully tomorrow.